You're listening to Stay Awhile, a place where we share our stories. There's a new episode every week.
Hi there. Welcome back to Stay Awhile.
And welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are undertaking, well, what I think is one of the most critical deep dives we've ever done.
Yeah.
We're plunging into the nature of these really deep-seated emotional wounds and, more importantly, how to achieve some kind of serenity.
The topic is forgiveness, but it's not the easy kind.
Not at all. We're looking at a very structured, cognitive approach. It's designed for a scenario that, for many people, just feels completely insurmountable.
And that scenario it's the one where you're just stuck carrying this immense pain. The anger, the feeling of betrayal, the sheer injustice of it all. It could be from a relationship, a business deal, a friendship, and you're struggling with it, but the person who caused the wound, they're completely oblivious.
Completely. They either never say sorry or they genuinely, truly do not get how deep their mistake was.
They don't know they were wrong, or maybe they just don't care enough to even think about it.
And the sources we've synthesized, they all acknowledge this specific struggle. It's like the ultimate unresolved emotional burden.
I think so many of us are carrying this. It's like this heavy sack of resentment and fury that you just can't process, you can't digest.
And that's not just a metaphor, it's physical.
It is.
Yeah.
That's the exhausting part. The emotional tax is constant. The sources describe it perfectly. You think about the betrayal and you feel that heat inside, that clenching. You tremble with frustration.
Even years later.
Years later. And the person who caused it is probably just living their life. They feel absolutely nothing. They've moved on so easily.
And you are carrying this impossibly heavy thing while they are just blissfully light.
That difference right there, that imbalance, it's an injustice in itself. It just eats away at you.
That imbalance of emotional weight is precisely what this deep dive is about. So the goal today is absolutely not to ask you to minimize the pain or to forget what happened.
Because that feels impossible.
Often it is. And it's not even necessary. The real goal is to provide a pathway, a kind of cognitive tool set that lets you view that past event with a new lightness.
A lightness, I like that.
We need to reduce the bitterness, allow you to finally drop that immense burden so you can just live on peacefully.
Okay, let's really unpack this because I think this is the most important distinction we have to make right now. Who is this whole process for?
This is the crucial part. This entire process is primarily and fundamentally for the benefit of the person who was hurt.
So it's for me.
It is 100% self-serving. You have to think of it not as this moral duty to absolve the other person, but as an essential tool for your own self-preservation.
It's like medicine for your own wound.
It's internal medicine, exactly. You apply it to your own wound so you can heal faster, cleaner. It is under no circumstances done for the sake of the person who caused the pain, especially if they're unrepentant.
And that's key, because if you frame it as something you're doing for them, especially if they don't deserve it, you'll never do it.
You'll resist it every step of the way.
You have to frame this as your personal liberation project. You're doing the work so you can stop trembling when their name comes up.
Exactly. And this can't be some superficial 30-second tip. The sources are clear. Emotional and cognitive processes that deal with deep betrayal, they require slow, careful, thorough analysis.
Right.
We have to start from a place of, shared understanding. We all get how lethal these wounds are. If you try to skip the deep work, the forgiveness won't stick.
And the resentment just goes into hibernation, ready to flare up again later.
Ready to come roaring back.
That makes perfect sense. The effort has to match the depth of the injury. Okay, so let's commit to that. Let's start with step one, making that cognitive shift.
Right. So the starting point for this self-liberating kind of forgiveness, is a radical and disciplined shift in how you mentally categorize the offense inside your own head.
Okay, let's unpack that discipline. We're not changing what happened. The facts are the facts.
No, the action happened. We're changing the internal label we put on the event.
So the first cognitive flip.
Right. It asks you to stop focusing so narrowly on what the person did to you, the specific action, the cheating, the lie, and start focusing instead on what they failed to provide.
What they did not do for you.
Exactly.
Okay, I can immediately feel the psychological difference there. If I focus on what they did, like they yelled at me or they cheated, it keeps me anchored in that victim role.
Yes.
It's all about their negative action and my reaction to it. It's like I'm replaying the trauma over and over.
Yeah. When you focus on the action, it feels active, intentional. It feels like it demands some kind of retribution.
Right.
But when you focus on what they fail to provide, it instantly shifts the conversation to a lack, a deficit, an
Yeah.
absence of something.
It's the same event, but a reversed perspective.
It is. And the sources stress how critical this reversal is.
Mm.
Framing the transgression as a failure of virtue rather than a malicious action is what sets the stage for the analysis in step 2.
Let's use some more examples from the source material. I think that will make this shift really clear.
Okay, let's take a financial betrayal. Maybe a business partner used company money for their own stuff, and it put the whole business at risk.
The raw, immediate view is, they stole from me, they're a thief. It's very emotional.
Right. But the reframed cognitive view becomes they failed to maintain integrity, or they failed to maintain financial trustworthiness.
So the action of stealing gets reinterpreted as the absence of a quality you are relying on.
It's a lack of integrity in their internal scaffolding of values.
What about something more subtle, like emotional unavailability? Or say your partner constantly gossips about your private business, or they never defend you in front of their family.
The original painful view is they constantly humiliated me, or they were disloyal.
Which feels very personal.
Very. The reframed view becomes they failed to provide protection, or they
Mhm.
failed to respect confidentiality. They just didn't have the essential emotional blueprint of a real partnership.
It sounds like we're depersonalizing the insult by professionalizing the language.
That's a great way to put it.
We're moving away from that emotional scream of how dare they, and more toward an analytical statement like, they lacked the ability to uphold the necessary standard.
That is the goal.
Yeah.
We're trying to categorize the event not as a direct attack born out of pure evil,
Right.
but as an inevitable outcome because of their personal deficit.
Yeah.
The emotional court demands malice. The analytical lab just requires observation of what was missing.
And you're still acknowledging the pain is real. No one is saying you should just get over it.
Absolutely not. The pain is valid. But this reframing, viewing the action as a lack, it sets us up perfectly for the next step, which is the deep dive into their capacity.
And that transition from the emotional story to the analytical one,
Yeah.
that's the bridge we need to cross to get to step 2, which I think is where we confront the most painful question of all.
It is. So once you've successfully reframed the offense, noting they failed to provide faithfulness or respect, we get to the core of self-liberation. And the crucial, almost heretical question you have to ask yourself is this: was the quality they failed to provide, was that virtue, that emotional blueprint ever truly taught to them? Was it modeled for them? Did they ever truly internalize it during their life?
Whoa.
Did they genuinely understand its value and the lethal consequence of not having it?
Wait, I have to stop you there. Because this is where the cognitive process just flies directly into the face of raw emotion.
I know.
Our anger demands accountability. Our pain is screaming, they absolutely knew this would hurt me and they did it anyway. If we decide they were just ignorant, doesn't that risk letting real malice or just deep selfishness off the hook?
That is the critical challenge here. And the sources spend a lot of time on this. This analysis is so difficult, which is why we have to bring up the non-defense clause right now.
Okay, what's that?
This analysis is not an excuse for their behavior. Wrong is wrong.
Uh-huh.
The source material uses the phrase "c'est la vie." Their actions cause real measurable harm. This exercise is purely a mental mechanism for your own relief. We are not trying to determine their guilt. We are trying to determine their potential for change and accountability. And if we determine their capacity is limited, we stop trying to get water from a dry well.
So it's not about their moral failing in the eyes of the world. It's about their internal structural ability to give you the thing you need.
Precisely. Let's talk about that difference between just knowing something and really understanding it.
Conceptual versus emotional knowledge.
Exactly. Rationally, almost everyone knows the rules of society. If you ask someone, is cheating bad?
Yeah.
They'll say yes. They have the intellectual knowledge that society doesn't like it.
But the key is in the emotional depth.
It's everything. The key difference is understanding the devastating impact, the emotional, financial, psychological fallout. The sources call it understanding the lethality of the wound they inflict.
And that takes empathy.
A strong internal scaffolding of empathy. Many offenders, they only have the intellectual concept. They know they shouldn't hurt people, but they lack the emotional blueprint to truly comprehend what that harm feels like, because maybe they've never felt it that deeply themselves, or they were never taught to anticipate it in others.
And if they don't have that emotional scaffolding, they can't possibly give you the respect or fidelity you need. It's like asking someone to solve a complex math problem when they were never taught basic addition.
They just don't have the tools.
They don't have the tools.
Let's delve into the anecdotes to really illustrate this. Let's start with that case of the young man and infidelity.
Right. The source described him as bright, charming, but he was constantly swapping partners. And his justification was just so utilitarian. We weren't compatible anymore. Why continue? It's cleaner to move on.
And the initial reaction, for anyone hearing that, is judgment. He's a narcissist. He's emotionally stunted. But the deeper realization came from analyzing his background. The source realized this friend truly lacked the internal, foundational concept of the emotional sanctity of commitment. He wasn't necessarily evil. He was conceptually deficient when it came to relational pain.
And his family background was... It was fractured by divorce, right?
Yeah.
With these really volatile transactional dynamics. So he grew up in a place where relationships were modeled as temporary contracts that you could just cancel when they became inconvenient.
He was taught the reverse of fidelity and commitment.
So when he betrays someone, he genuinely isn't thinking about the long-term, lasting emotional damage.
In his cognitive framework, the pain is momentary. It's a small cost of doing business in relationships. He cannot grasp why the other person is still suffering months or years later. For him, the emotional cost was tiny, so he assumes it must be for everyone.
So his actions aren't driven by a desire to inflict maximum pain.
No, they're driven by a lack of the internal structure that would prevent him from inflicting it.
So if the victim keeps trying to hold him accountable for the pain, they're basically demanding he speak a language, the language of deep shared commitment that he was never, ever taught.
And that realization, while it's incredibly painful, it's also incredibly liberating.
It is.
Now think about that second example, the controlling behavior. The woman who constantly monitored her boyfriend, checking his messages, needing to know where he was, causing immense fatigue and resentment.
The refrain defense was, she failed to respect my autonomy and freedom.
Yes. And the natural victim response is fury. She thinks she owns me. This is so disrespectful.
Of course.
But her background revealed she grew up in an environment where her parents and family had the exact same strict controlling dynamics. In her world, control wasn't seen as oppression. It was seen as care, as security.
So she was just unconsciously carrying that learned behavior forward. She didn't have the internal scaffolding for personal freedom because she'd never seen or experienced healthy boundaries.
She literally did not know how to give someone space because in her emotional blueprint, relationships meant surveillance and constraint.
So if you try to hold her accountable for a level of trust and space that she has never even conceptualized as healthy or necessary, you're just setting yourself up for endless frustration.
The struggle is between what you need and what they are structurally capable of giving.
This brings me back to my earlier question, though. What if the person is just really self-centered? What if they were exposed to these values, they understood them, but they just consciously chose their own immediate gratification? How do we stop this from becoming just an excuse for bad behavior?
This requires brutal honesty in your own analysis. The sources guide us to look deeply at the pattern, not just one event. If they were raised in an environment that did model integrity and fidelity, and yet they constantly display this behavior, then yes, the conclusion points more toward calculated self-interest.
But even in that case of intense self-interest, the source material suggests the failure is still often rooted in a capacity deficit, a deficit of empathy.
That's the core insight. A deeply self-centered person is still conceptually deficient in one critical area: the ability to prioritize the well-being of others over their own temporary comfort.
Yeah.
Their internal blueprint lacks the structural component of true, other-centered empathy. If they had that quality, they physically couldn't choose their own fleeting desire at the cost of your lethal pain. Their ignorance lies in their inability to prioritize your humanity over their own need.
Wow. That reframes even calculated betrayal as a failure of emotional capacity, not necessarily a targeted act of cosmic evil against me.
Yes.
It shifts the question from, did they hate me, to, were they whole enough to share a healthy life with?
That is the pivotal shift.
Yeah.
And this leads to the difficult, necessary moment, which the sources call the conclusion of surrender. In Vietnamese, khu hang.
Surrender. That sounds like defeat. It feels like letting them win.
It's an intellectual defeat, yes, because your anger wants a righteous victory. It wants a clear admission of guilt that matches the scale of your suffering. But the sources argue that reaching this conclusion, however painful, is necessary for your mental freedom.
Mm.
You're tired of thinking about this. You've exhausted every avenue trying to make sense of something that is, at its core, senseless.
So we have to accept that this immense emotional wound we're carrying, it came from a person who simply didn't have the necessary emotional scaffolding, fidelity, respect, empathy to give us in the first place.
You accept the possibility of their inherent limitation. The purpose of this step is not to excuse the action. It's to stop spending your limited, valuable emotional energy trying to hold an empty vessel accountable for failing to pour out water.
The container was empty to begin with.
When you truly internalize that the quality you needed was structurally absent in them, you stop chasing accountability from that source. And that acceptance is the necessary, painful step before true relief can finally begin to flow.
So step 2 was, that was the hard-won battle for mental closure. We did the analysis, we accepted the deficit, we said, I'm done trying to understand their motives, they just lack the necessary emotional blueprint. Now, step 3 is the transition from that painful analysis to active protective control over our future.
This is the empowerment phase. We move from being defined by the trauma to actively defining our future standards and, who gets access to our emotional space.
And the starting point for that is defining our core values, making them absolutely non-negotiable.
Absolutely. The trauma of the past has a strange paradox. It clarifies the system of values you hold as essential. If you were hurt by infidelity, then loyalty and integrity, they get written down in stone as your guiding principles.
Or if you were hurt by control, then respect, dignity, autonomy, those become paramount.
And these clarified, documented values will now govern every future association you have, romantic or otherwise.
And clarifying your internal standards, that leads right to the next mandate, what the sources call selecting whole people, or choosing your companions wisely.
It's ancient wisdom, right? You must now actively vet people to ensure they possess that necessary emotional scaffolding of the quality you value before you allow any bonding or commitment to happen.
So if you require absolute trustworthiness, you have to check their inventory for that concept before you invite them into your life. You're seeking people who have what the last person lacked.
Precisely.
That sounds great in theory, but how do we do that in practice? You can't just hand someone a questionnaire on a first date.
Yeah.
So the getting to know you phase, the exploration, it suddenly shifts from just fun dating to a necessary investigation into their core value system.
It becomes an exploratory mission. You're testing their internal structure under low-stakes pressure. And the sources give us a lot of practical vetting tips, far beyond just watching how they react to a movie.
Okay, give us those tools. How can we actually see this internal blueprint of virtue in action?
Okay, first, observe how they treat people who are not useful to them, specifically service staff or subordinates.
That's a huge indicator.
It's massive. If they're charming to their boss or your parents, that could be transactional. But if they're rude, impatient, or condescending to a waiter, a cleaner, a distant relative, they lack the fundamental scaffolding of universal respect and kindness.
And if they lack respect for strangers, they lack the capacity to maintain deep respect for you when the relationship eventually gets difficult.
Exactly. Respect should be horizontal, not just vertical. Second, analyze their narrative about past failures and ex-partners.
Oh, this tells you everything.
It does. Do they describe every ex as crazy? Is every job they lost the fault of the system? If they take zero responsibility for any past conflict, they likely lack the emotional capacity for self-reflection and ownership.
And a refusal to own the past is a guarantee they will project future problems onto you.
100%. Third, observe their behavior under minor unexpected stress. This is crucial. Wait until a plan gets canceled, or their flight is delayed, or they lose their car keys.
The character revealed during crisis is the true character.
It is. Do they descend into a volcanic rage? Do they instantly blame everyone else? Or do they keep their perspective and stay calm? A strong internal structure of emotional maturity should hold up under minor stress. If they shatter under small pressure, they cannot handle the pressure of real life and long-term commitment.
Okay, what else?
Fourth, look at their financial philosophy. Now, this isn't always a moral issue, but a person who lives perpetually beyond their means takes huge risks or shows an entitlement toward money. They may lack the capacity for long-term responsibility, stability, and integrity. These traits are often linked.
If they consistently value fleeting pleasure over sustained security, that probably applies to their emotional relationships too.
It often does. And finally, number 5. Let's revisit that environmental observation. Observe their family environment, if you can, but with an educated eye.
Right. We talked about this in step 2.
Look at the core dynamics. Are fidelity, affection, strong principles actually modeled there? If the environment is orderly, respectful, and communicative, the probability of them having those internal values is high. If it's chaotic, controlling, or transactional, you just have to be extremely cautious.
You're not vetting their family, you're vetting the emotional education they received.
That's it. This vetting process isn't about finding some perfect utopian person. It's about diligently screening out those who demonstrably lack the conceptual capacity or emotional blueprint that is most vital for your own peace.
You're selecting people who are whole in the specific areas where you were previously wounded.
And step 3 isn't just about screening others. It's about actively rebuilding your own life. This is where that powerful analogy of the new bricks comes in.
Right. We have those bricks of sorrow and pain at the foundation of our past structure. They're real.
We can't delete them, but the present must be dedicated to laying new bricks. Bricks of self-respect, bricks of clear dignity, bricks of kindness to others, and bricks of wholeness in your own life and pursuits.
So by continuously building upward with these positive new bricks, by focusing intensely on self-respect, seeking better relationships, and demanding higher standards, the painful old foundation becomes structurally less important.
It gets covered up. It's diminished by the massive improved structure you're building on top of it.
The focus shifts entirely from looking back at their failure to looking up at your own growth.
And your present and future improve. It naturally leads to more happiness, and critically, it automatically raises your own standards so high that you cease to even tolerate the presence of people who lack these key emotional blueprints.
That is an active, continuous process of self-betterment.
It is. And the sources conclude that this structured thinking, the reframing, the cold analysis of their ignorance, and this aggressive selective rebuilding, it allows the victim to achieve the final, complete act of liberation.
And what is that final thought?
That final thought is your own personal manifesto of self-respect. I am closing the past. I know they couldn't give me what they didn't have, and I will stop chasing them for it. But the future and the present, they are mine to control. I will no longer allow people without the emotional scaffolding of the virtues I cherish into my life.
That's the ultimate reclamation of personal agency. That's the true meaning of this self-liberating forgiveness. The shift from analyzing their failure to controlling my selection process is the pivot point for moving forward.
And it requires all 3 steps to be effective. We spent a lot of time today covering these 3 core steps to achieving inner peace when the other person is just unrepentant or unaware.
Let's quickly summarize the method one last time. First, you shift the cognitive lens. You strictly reframe the deed as a lack, a failure of virtue, what they didn't give you.
Second, you do the difficult, painful work of analyzing their capacity and potential ignorance. You accept that they may have truly lacked the conceptual or emotional blueprint to understand the scale of the pain they caused.
And third, you transition from analysis to action. You actively define your core values, and you aggressively curate your future relationships based on those non-negotiable standards, using deep vetting to only bond with people who have the emotional scaffolding you need.
And we have to acknowledge again, this process is incredibly difficult. It requires immense emotional labor to override that natural instinct for anger, for retribution, for that satisfying apology that may never come.
But the sources all confirm that this effort is absolutely worth it for your own serenity.
This deep structural analysis is the powerful medicine that finally allows those old wounds to stop stinging, not because you forgot, but because you finally understood the source of the injury. It lets you truly let go.
You stop fighting a battle that can never be won.
Exactly.
That's powerful. And as we leave you with this path toward defining those new bricks for your life, there is one final provocative thought that requires a little more self-reflection.
The sources reveal that, yes, the pain we endure is often caused by people who were never taught the specific virtue we were looking for. However, if you find that you have repeatedly been drawn into deep, committed relationships with people who consistently lacked a certain quality, honesty, respect, fidelity, this raises a really important question you need to ask yourself. Did you fully understand and internalize that specific virtue within yourself and in your own boundaries before you began seeking it and demanding it in others?
Wow.
It suggests that identifying, valuing, and embodying that virtue within yourself is the necessary first step before you can ever successfully identify and demand it in a future partner.
So the deeper work might really be on the self. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into self-liberation.
Until next time, stay well.